Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you with the most up-to-date political, economic, and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in.
Happy Wednesday, everybody. Let's begin today's episode with the Chinese economy, and we have two main developments to cover. Monday was Dragon Boat Festival, giving the PRC a 3-day weekend. Spending over the holiday periods can act as a good proxy for consumer confidence generally, a metric Beijing policymakers and the market are both watching very closely. With that said, how did activity over this 3-day period perform? Well, according to the Ministry of Culture and Tourism data published yesterday, domestic travel continued to rebound during the Dragon Boat Festival holiday, but per capita spending has yet to return to pre-pandemic levels. Some 110 million trips, up 6.3% year-on-year and 14.6% from the same holiday in 2019 were seen. Total tourism spending hit 40.4 billion yuan, $5.6 billion, up 8.1% on the year and a 2.6% increase from 2019, that is pre-pandemic. Despite the number of trips and total spend both increasing versus 2019, average spend per tourist was 12.3% below the 2019 level, despite 27% GDP growth over that period, a fact that one commentator called still shocking. According to a city report published today, the increasing number of trips but comparatively muted spending reflects, quote, more cautious spending and demand diverted to lower-tier cities or value discount packages, end quote, which concluded travel demand was, quote, a bit weak, end quote. Chinese financial media outlet Caixin observed in a piece today that the per capita spending extends a moderating trend from several holidays in the first half of this year, including February's Spring Festival and May's Labor Day holiday. Total spending for these two holidays also grew at a slower pace than the number of trips, although both figures exceeded pre-pandemic levels. Quote, the mixed results underscore the changing travel preferences of Chinese tourists, who are increasingly opting for cheaper trips as a bleak job market, prolonged real estate slump, and low consumer confidence continue to drag on the economy, end quote. Xing Zhaopeng, an analyst with ANZ Bank, expressed today, quote, low costs domestic travel and self-driving were the main highlights of spending during the holiday, underscoring the preference for saving costs, end quote. Bookings for international flights departing during the latest holiday soared 60%, and international hotel reservations by Chinese tourists rose 50% compared with the same period last year, according to online tour operator chinaupdatechannel. This is good news for the tourism industry in the wider region, which was hit hard by the zero-COVID and post-opening period when Chinese tourism dried up. Japan, Thailand, South Korea, Malaysia, and Singapore were among the most popular overseas destinations, according to a Trip.com report. Meanwhile, today, Wednesday, the National Bureau of Statistics published the official Consumer Price Index. According to these numbers, China's consumer prices rose mildly in May, while factory gate prices continue to fall, suggesting persistently weak demand as Beijing continues to try to lift poor consumption. This is the fourth consecutive month that the Consumer Price Index rose, up 0.3% from a year earlier. The factory gate prices continued to fall in May, but narrowed their decline from April. The Producer Price Index fell 1.4% in May from a year earlier, marking a 20th consecutive month of contraction. Zhang Zhiwei, President and Chief Economist at Pinpoint Asset Management, warned that deflationary fears have not disappeared either, expressing in a note to clients yesterday, quote, these are broadly in line with the expectations. I think the deflationary pressure has not faded yet. The improvement in PPI is largely driven by commodity prices such as copper and gold, which is not a reflection of China's domestic demand. End quote. Next up, we discuss Taiwan tensions within the context of the broader US-China competition. This week saw the publication of a Washington Post interview with the new head of the US Indo-Pacific Command, Admiral Samuel Paparo. The naval leaders said that Plan A in the defense of Taiwan is to deter Xi Jinping from ever attempting an invasion, quote, by making sure that he never looks across the Taiwan Strait and sees an easy victory, end quote, explaining, quote, "The key to thwarting Xi's assumed strategy is a US strategy called Hellscape. The idea is that as soon as China's invasion fleet begins moving across the 100-mile waterway that separates China and Taiwan, the US military would deploy thousands of unmanned submarines, unmanned surface ships, and aerial drones to flood the area and give Taiwanese, US, and partner forces time to mount a response." End quote. Adding, quote, "I want to turn the Taiwan Strait into an unmanned hellscape using a number of classified capabilities so that I can make their lives utterly miserable for a month, which buys me the time for the rest of everything. I can't tell you what's in it, but it's real and it's deliverable." End quote. Meanwhile, this week, Washington-based think tank, the Center for Strategic and International Studies, published a special report called How China Could Quarantine Taiwan. Drawing on in-depth research, tabletop exercises, private consultations, and expert surveys, the report lays out China's potential motivations for a quarantine and maps out two possible scenarios of how China could accomplish quarantine operations. Before we move into these scenarios, just quickly, if you're enjoying today's episode of China Update, it's a huge help if you can hit the like button. Subscribing is also a big help. These are the only ways in which the channel can grow, in which the algorithm is happy. Sharing is a big help too, and Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are also in the description for those who want to help keep the channel financially sustainable. It's just me making all these episodes, but this is all a tremendous source of support for which I'm deeply appreciative. Thank you so much, everybody, for the ongoing support. In the first scenario, Beijing leverages its law enforcement forces to conduct a limited maritime quarantine focused on one main port. Chinese law enforcement vessels are authorized to board vessels, conduct on-site inspections, question personnel, and undertake other measures against non-compliant ships. Authorities threaten fines and market access restrictions for companies flouting the new rules. Quarantine is set to enter into force 48 hours after the announcement. If China meets relatively limited pushback and most companies comply with Chinese customs rules, China begins to draw down operations after about 1 week. However, a considerable law enforcement and military presence persists around Taiwan in the weeks that follow, an indication of the new normal China has established. The second scenario is a significantly scaled-up version of the first scenario. Like in the first scenario, China declared new enhanced customs inspection rules requiring companies to request authorization from Chinese authorities to enter Taiwan. However, in the second scenario, China sends a much larger overall contingent of law enforcement patrol ships to encircle the island. It deploys a dozen of those off the west coast ports of Taipei and Taichung. It also sends 9 near the northern port of Keelung, China's second busiest import hub, and 6 to the smaller eastern ports of Hualien and Suao. China's Navy deploys 5 SAGs to intimidate Taiwan and deter US and other forces that may try to intervene. PLA aircraft also fly regular sorties to conduct missions around Taiwan. China supplements its naval deployment by positioning the Shandong aircraft carrier and its strike group southeast of Taiwan. It launches frequent sorties of J-15 fighters east of Taiwan, repeating operations that the PLA exercised in recent years. These are the two scenarios that are explored in the report, which concludes, and we're quoting the report once again, "For both these scenarios, Beijing's goal is not to hermetically seal Taiwan. Instead, these campaigns are designed to punish Taiwan, assert Beijing's claimed sovereignty over the island, test the response from international shipping companies, and put significant pressure on Taiwan, the United States, and others. While China has the capabilities to successfully execute these and other quarantine variations, these would require operations that are far more complex than anything China has demonstrated to date. Such moves would carry significant risk for China, and its success would depend to a large degree on how Taiwan, the United States, and others respond. Even if successfully implemented, there are limits to what a quarantine can achieve. If Beijing's goal is to inflict enough pain to force Taiwan's surrender, China would need to move beyond the grey zone into overt military action. A military blockade would be a key option for China if it seeks to forcibly unify Taiwan without launching an all-out invasion. The Center for Strategic and International Studies report is called How China Could Quarantine Taiwan and is well worth a read for anybody interested in this space. Meanwhile, former Australian Prime Minister and a China expert respected both in the US and in the PRC, Kevin Rudd, this week published an opinion piece in the Washington Post called "The West Needs to Deter China's Grey Zone Adventurism." This is worth quoting at length. Taiwan's Democratic Progressive Party, in government since 2016, has opposed the One China element within the 1992 consensus. As a result, Beijing has rejected all official dialogue with Taiwanese administrators since the party came to power. The DPP has argued that Taiwan was already independent and so had no need formally to declare it. President Tsai Ing-wen, Taiwan's president from 2016 through 2024, took this concept further, continuing to reject the 1992 consensus while refining the DPP's position on Taiwan's political status as one committed to maintaining the status quo. This position has been reiterated by the new DPP President William Lai, who took office last month. But Beijing is increasingly making it plain to foreign interlocutors that this stance is not sufficient. Far from being relieved that the DPP has stepped back from the brink of any formal declaration of independence, Beijing is signaling loud and clear that its political objective remains to force Taiwan into negotiations on its preferred one country, two systems model that it has used for Hong Kong. Beijing might well be in the process of concluding that Taiwan, thinking of itself as de facto autonomous, with the international community on much the same page, will become further entrenched and irreversible. As time begins to run out, from China's perspective, we will begin to see a change in Chinese strategy toward the Taiwan problem. Indeed, we are already seeing it, with China increasingly availing itself of a multi-dimensional grey zone strategy over the past 18 months or so, a strategy aimed at applying new forms of pressure on Taiwanese and international public opinion to force Taipei to the negotiating table. Here ends the direct quote. In a speech to the Asia-Pacific Center for Security Studies in Honolulu, Hawaii, earlier this month, Rudd warned too that the maintenance of the status quo in the Taiwan Strait was no longer an acceptable outcome for Beijing. Quote, "Maintaining the status quo might sound acceptable to the United States, but it is unacceptable to Beijing, as China perceives Taiwan's ongoing and growing autonomy to be intolerable. Beijing has signaled that its political objective remains to force Taiwan into negotiations on its preferred so-called one country, two systems, the same model it has used to control Hong Kong." End quote. Okay, that is today's episode of China Update. Thank you so much everybody for watching. Have a good Wednesday, and I will see you all tomorrow.